Was Bill Hunt the first guest?
Actually, he wasn't. I had a friend from my church who is very well versed in the Bible. We talked about atheism.
Oh,
It was very fascinating.
I thought you weren't doing religion and politics. You're just doing anti-religion?
No, I'll do religion. I'll
Oh.
do religion all day long, and I'll talk about politics in the sense of its effect on us as a nation right now. I don't mind talking about it in terms of its impact on people regionally and the businesses and things like that. What I don't want to talk about is like fucking how awesome Trump is or how bad Obama is or vice versa, right? I'm not bringing politics. Like I don't give a fuck what politicians have to say anymore because they're all fucking full of shit as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So you discuss politics, just not politicians.
I don't even want to discuss politicians, right? Like it's too polarizing.
Yeah.
Right. All that stuff is so polarizing now that I'm like, okay, let's just have a discussion. Right? Let's just talk about shit, right? And let's not bring politics into it. It really is a minimal part of our lives that we've made into this macro thing that, you know, because the TV has to fill up fucking time with stuff.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And we're losing the ability to talk about stuff. And that's one of the big reasons for this, right? There are a few people out there that are doing this right now, but there needs to be more of it. And if it fucking interests me, and right, let's do it.
Right. So if I said right now I don't want to talk about it, that would prove your point.
Well, hey, listen, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But I think
I don't know enough about it to talk about it. I'll just sound like a jackass.
Right. Well, and I think there's more to talk about.
I just know red and blue, and Crips and Bloods.
Right.
I don't know.
And that's essentially what they are, right? All right, so let's go. Are you ready, Mike? All right, let's do it. 5, 4, 3. Whoops. I'm going to start that one over again. Okay. 5, 4. Greg, how are you today?
Good morning, Cameron.
Greg Kading, one of my most favorite people in the whole world. Did you know that, Greg?
Yes, that's why I think you set me up this morning for success.
I did. Well, you're staring at the we should put this backwards, I guess, right? You're staring at the bottle of whiskey here. You asked me before if you could drink when you came on, and I said, of course you can. That's perfectly acceptable.
Wow. That just made it sound like I have a drinking problem. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm asking whether or not it's going to be permissible to have a drink.
But it wasn't 8 o'clock in the morning when we had the conversation.
That's right. Yeah.
So
by the looks of it, somebody else likes to indulge.
You know, here's the thing, right? Like I used to be. I went through this whiskey phase, Manhattans, right?
Oh, I love Manhattans.
And it's a funny story, actually. So I went through whiskey phase. I'd say I would drink probably, this make me sound like an alcoholic. I'd probably drink like 4 or 5 ounces a night, right? Which, you know, I mean, that's like 4 or 5 drinks, right?
That's like old Mad Men era. I love it.
So, and I got pretty good at making, Manhattans. But what happened was, on an interesting note, I went to the rectory at my parish one night with the priests, and people don't know this about priests.
Okay.
They do drink, right? Like that's not off limits. And we had a dinner, and I drank so much whiskey that night
with your priest.
With my priest.
Sweet.
Several priests.
Okay.
That I had to admit myself to the hospital the next morning.
Seriously, like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were they schnockered up too?
You know, they were having a good time. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So I actually went to the hospital, and I drank so much that night that I had jaundice a little bit. Like my eyes turned a little yellow.
Wow.
Yeah, that scared me, right?
Yeah.
That scared me big time. So I actually cut way back. So like now, I may have a Manhattan once or twice a month, and like that's it.
Didn't you at one time need to get emergency medical treatment in Las Vegas also? I want to tell that story real quick about having to go down and get like an emergency IV to recover. So
that's a very good story, actually. Who are we interviewing here, me or you? So the quick story on that is I went out to Vegas on a surveillance for work, and I was with a mutual friend of ours, Bill Hunt, and and we went out. It was in June or July, so it was hot. And if you're Vegas, you don't think about it, but even though you think you're drinking water, you're not drinking enough.
Did you think you were drinking water?
During the day, yeah, I thought I was drinking water, but not enough. So we went out that night after it was over, and we started drinking. Well, if you start off dehydrated, right, you're toast already. Dehydrated plus drank too much. 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm up, I'm just heaving, and we've got to do a surveillance again the next morning. And they have this thing called hangover heaven there. And it's this anesthesiologist who figured out like the perfect mix of IV.
Right, B12 and
exactly.
Yeah.
The concept was it was a bus that would drive around, pick you up at your hotel, and then they drive around and you'd be on the IV. Well, I think that concept didn't work, but they still had the bus. So I went and I got in the bus. I was dead. You talked to Bill, I was dead. I was literally the walking dead. I got on that bus 2 hours later. Dude, it was like it never happened.
Wow.
It was unreal. It was
reborn.
Reborn. We went out to breakfast with his brother afterwards, and eggs, bacon, pancakes, full meal.
Wow.
Like it never happened. It
Probably
was amazing.
just like Pedialyte, B12, and some ibuprofen all mixed up in a cocktail.
That's right.
Next thing you know, man,
perfect.
It's a do-over. Yeah. Like you're gonna hit it again.
Well, that's what people do out there. Yeah. You could pre-order it now, right? They'll come to your room. They'll hook you up. How are you doing?
I've been there before.
Yeah, we all have.
I've been there before. There's been times where I'd have paid any amount of money to feel better.
Well, that was one of those ones too. It was $125, I think. I'll tell you what, man, it was the best $125 I ever spent.
And then you drove home.
Well, no, we actually worked that day, and then I drove home. And I drove home, right? It was amazing.
You were just amped up.
Yeah.
You go to work for 48 straight hours.
How are you doing?
Things are good, man. Everything's good.
You've been really busy. Two things that I really wanted to talk to you about. One was obviously the Tupac investigation, Biggie Small.
Okay, we have to call him Tupac.
Oh, sorry, Tupac. My bad.
You'll get butchered by his fans.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to. He still has a lot of fans, huh?
He does. Yeah, he does.
Do they reach out to you ever?
All the time. I'm constantly answering emails and Twitter questions, and just all the time. It's an ongoing process.
And are they receptive to you? What's their take on you?
Yeah, 99% of them very receptive. They have an insatiable appetite for anything Tupac. And of course, you've got the fringe people that are, convinced he's still alive and that type of thing. But yeah, it's an environment of respect. I think people realize, I'm not some hip hop guy, but I can tell them what I know about his murder. So yeah, people are really fascinated with him as a music legend.
And what about the haters? Do you get on the haters? Are they just what are they upset with you about?
Well, they think I'm part of a huge government conspiracy, that the CIA killed Tupac, and that, there's this huge, massive effort to try to cover that up, and, that we're all, complicit in murdering him.
So there's a fringe on every side.
Oh, it's gone so far as to say that they got some photographs, some old grainy photographs in Las Vegas of a bicycle cop, and they've taken that really poor quality photograph and said, "See, Greg Kading was there the night he was killed. Look, we have photographic proof he was there."
Well, they go that far.
Oh yeah. I've been accused of being involved in his murder, so it's fantastic.
So take us back to that then. You were in the LAPD, you were a detective. Tell me the story. I mean, how did this thing come up?
Well, originally, I'm working major narcotics at the time. This is 2006, enjoying that assignment. I loved working dope. And I get a call from Robbery Homicide Division. Robbery Homicide is reinvigorating the cold case of Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, who was gunned down in March of 1997 in Los Angeles at a Peterson Auto Museum. And they said, hey, we've got this lawsuit being waged at the city, and there's these allegations that the LAPD, members of the LAPD, either acquiesced or were somehow involved in the conspiracy to kill Biggie, and we've got this huge lawsuit looming over us. We need to form a task force and see if we can't get this thing solved once and for all. And so investigating Biggie Smalls' murder led us kind of naturally into overlapping into the Tupac Shakur murder, because he was only murdered 6 months prior. Although it was in Las Vegas, everybody kind of assumed there was some relationship between these two murders. So, and in fact, we proved there was. But that's how I got involved. I was asked to come join this small group of LAPD guys, and then we expanded it to a much broader federal task force with people from all the alphabet agencies, the FBI, DEA, and ATF.
And so, how long did it take you to formulate the theory that those two murders were connected? And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, right, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories kind of around who killed the two of them, why it was done, and we've talked about this before. I mean, I think you have a much more simplified theory about what really happened. And how did that kind of play itself out?
We went into it with the mindset, that we were going to investigate every theory as if it could be true, and then through a process of elimination, we'd be stuck with the one that can't be disproven, and then that would be the most validated position. We got further beyond that, and ultimately, once we got to where we were getting co-conspirators that were involved in the murders confessing to their roles, then we knew that we had the goods and that we could finally say that we've solved it from an investigative standpoint. We knew what happened. And once people started talking, we were able to verify that there was a connection between the two, that Biggie Smalls was killed in direct retaliation for Tupac's murder 6 months earlier. So there were, these conflicts going on between these two record labels, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and their CEOs, and then of course their rappers, and then the gangs that they affiliated with. Everybody was at odds. And so when you look at it just strictly from a practical sense standpoint, it's like, oh yeah, this is a very simple explanation, and it's where all the evidence points. And so that we don't consider it theory, we consider it fact, and it's the definitive explanation for the murders.
And so essentially it was just boiled down to gang rivalry.
Yeah, egos that got out of control, violence that got out of control, just a evolution of conflict.
So what was the underlying purpose for offing Tupac?
Tupac was killed primarily because he had jumped a Southside Crip gang member earlier that night at the MGM casino in Las Vegas. He had ran over, he sucker punched this Crip gang member, and that Crip gang member had previously gotten into a fight with these blood associates of Tupac and stolen a death row medallion. And so when that individual that had that medallion kind of yanked from his chain, or his chain yanked from his neck, just months prior at a mall here in Lakewood, outside of Los Angeles, he walks up to Tupac in the MGM lobby and says, "Hey, there's that clown that jumped me." So Tupac took it upon himself to run over and sucker punch that guy, and then the rest of the entourage, a bunch of gang members, including Suge Knight, started to stomp him down. And so Orlando Anderson went, hooked up with his Crip friends, including his uncle, and they decided to retaliate.
And so how did they track him down? Because wasn't it done in the middle of the Strip or something? How did that play itself out?
Well, it was well known that after the Mike Tyson fight, which they are attending there at the MGM, it was well known that Suge Knight had his own nightclub, a local nightclub called 662, and that there was going to be an after party there, and that Mike Tyson was supposed to make an appearance after his quick knockout of Sheldon. And then and Tupac was going to go and perform at that nightclub also. It was well known. It was advertised, and anybody in the know in that kind of community would have known where to go to find Tupac and Suge. So the Crips did. They went to that club. They encountered some rivals, and there were also law enforcement that was in the parking lot doing security. So they said, "To hell with it. This isn't a good place to retaliate. Let's turn around and get out of here." Well, as they were leaving, they happened to end up on the same road that the entourage, the caravan with Tupac and Suge, is coming in the opposite direction. And the music's on, blaring, girls are screaming. And so these Crip gang members looked across the street essentially and said, well, there they are right there. They pulled a U-turn, pulled alongside the caravan of cars, crept up to the BMW where Tupac was sitting, and unloaded.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty simple, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Huh. And so how does that then connect over to Biggie Small?
So because these Crip gang members were doing some kind of street-type security for Bad Boy Records, for Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, and for Puffy Combs, Suge Knight knew that. In fact, Suge Knight looked across the car as the gunfire was about to erupt, and he looked at this guy named Keefy D, this Southside Crip that he'd known since childhood, and knew immediately that it was the Crips that were in that white Cadillac that was shooting at him. And he knew that those guys were associated with Sean Combs and Bad Boy Records, and so Suge Knight decided to retaliate against them and do what they had done and take out his number one rapper.
And how come Suge's never been taken down in any of this, correct?
No, Suge's never been held accountable for his role in Biggie's murder.
Why?
There wasn't enough proof. There wasn't enough evidence to gain a prosecution on it. Although Suge Knight was always suspected of being behind Biggie's murder, just like these Crips were always suspected of being behind Tupac's murder. Nobody was cooperating. Law enforcement couldn't get anybody to make positive IDs. They couldn't do anything that would raise the evidence to the level where you could, not only effect an arrest, but present a successful prosecution.
And I'm supposing that's because Suge, everybody's terrified of the guy.
Yeah, and it's the street code, back here in the mid-'90s especially, if you're part of a gang and part of this kind of sub-community of the gang culture, you don't cooperate with law enforcement. You don't answer questions. You don't provide them the information they need to go out and make arrests. You handle it on your own, which is what these gangs do. They take it upon themselves to go and retaliate, and that's exactly how this thing played out.
And in terms of what was happening politically on this, and when I say politically, I don't mean like politicians, I mean inside the department. Were there politics at play for you in the department at this time on this investigation, or was it just do your job, figure out who it is, and move on?
Well, keeping in mind that I come along in 2006, so that's 10 years after Tupac's been killed and 9 years after Biggie's been killed, and the politics are that the police department's facing this massive lawsuit, and there was a comment by a judge during one of the hearings that based on what she'd seen that at that point, pre-trial, she said if she were to make a judgment on behalf of the plaintiffs, it would be to the tune of about $400 million, because that would have been Biggie's estimated lifetime earning potential. So that number, of course, got the city's attention, and they said, hey, we can't, you never know what's going to happen in civil court, you know as well as I do.
Yeah.
Things can be kind of unpredictable. And so they put together an emergency task force. When I got there, I was told, Greg, anything you need, go out there, do whatever you got to do, figure out if we're behind this, we've got to figure that out and be able to deal with that. But if we're not behind it, let's prove that so that we can get out from under this lawsuit. So there was never I never, at least as the main investigator in the case, ever got the sense that the department believed they were complicit, but they said, go out and figure it out. If we are, we are. And, let's find out if there's any merit to them. It didn't take long to realize that the sources of this information about police involvement were absolutely unreliable. They were schizophrenics, they were jailhouse informants, they were people that were just trying to, they were watching TV and then calling up the police department and saying, hey, I know something about this. I have a cousin on the outside, and he told me he was there. Yeah, Suge Knight hired these cops. And so it got really muddied up because of misinformation and just outright lies. But of course, as investigators, we got to follow the leads.
So I was unaware of that. So really, what you were tasked to do is not necessarily solve the murders as much as see if LAPD was really involved in this thing, and then the figuring out who did it was kind of an afterthought. Is that how it played out, or was it always it's a cold case, try to figure out who did it?
Yeah, it was always, solve them if you can, but they go hand in hand. Solving it will either prove that the claims are right or they'll disprove the claims. The only way that we can get out from under those claims is by figuring out whether they're true or not. There was no way for us to, and this was a period of time in the late 90s where we had the Rampart issues, and we had, all of these kind of the perception of police corruption. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things were kind of weighing into the environment that we were working in. But we had absolute freedom to go out and figure it out. If there were going to be cops involved, let's figure it out and then figure out how to deal with it.
So tell me about then leaving LAPD and the book, because that's kind of a fascinating story in and of itself.
Well, we got to the bottom of what happened to Christopher Wallace, to Biggie Smalls, and we had a confessing co-conspirator that implicated Suge Knight as wanting to offer money to a hitman associate of his, a guy named Wardell Faust, and the intermediary, the girl that's confessing, is providing the funds in order to convince this hitman to go through with it, which he does, and we figure this all out. So we now provide that information to the city and to the city's lawyers, and they know that they can go into court and say, hey, we've got a confessing co-conspirator who's naming names and pointing fingers, and none of them have any association with the LAPD. And we can, we'll take this lawsuit to the end because we know that ultimately, we're gonna receive a favorable judgment. So the city realizes, hey, we're in a great position now. They then, in turn, inform Valletta Wallace, who is the one who's brought the lawsuit against the city, and her attorneys, listen, we've gotten to the bottom of your son's murder, and it doesn't weigh well as far as your theories about cops, and you want to keep wasting your money pursuing this unwinnable case, so be it. And the lawyers realize, it's in our best interest just to let it go at this point. We can't win, and we're not going to get a favorable judgment, so they retract their lawsuits. Well, once they did that, the city was like, okay, we win. We've accomplished at least that much, which was probably their primary motive,
right?
Was to get out from under that possible judgment. So once they did that, they disbanded the lawsuit. I was reassigned to go and work other cold cases, and I was just frustrated because I thought, man, the public's never going to get the benefit of knowing what we know. We've solved this case. We know what happened, but the police department isn't going to go public with this. So I got the idea to write a book, and I met with a ghostwriter and met with a literary agent. Got a great proposal set up, and Random House gave me a really, really, really lucrative offer. One that helped me make that decision that it was time to leave the job. And so I did. I put in my paperwork. I'd already had, 25 years of law enforcement behind me, and I just thought it was time to retire and maybe do this thing. So I did. I left. We wrote our manuscript. We provided it to Random House, and they saw what was in the book, and all of a sudden they got cold feet because Random House is in New York. Right across the street from their building is Bad Boy Records, and they know that Puffy Combs can be very litigious, and we're saying in the book that he had a hand in Tupac's murder, soliciting the murder. And so they said, in good faith, we're not going to publish this, just defending, even if we're successful, just defending the claims that could be made against us, undermine what the profit of the book would, is a business decision. So now I'm retired and I'm stuck with this manuscript and no publisher. So I decided to sell. Oh, and then they wanted the advance back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and of course that was never going to happen. I gave them exactly what they had asked for, so we kept the money.
Right.
And ultimately, I said I've got this manuscript, so I went and self-published it.
And how did it do when you self-published it?
Did really, really well. It did fantastic, actually. I sold what would have been bestseller numbers.
Really?
Yeah.
That much interest on it. And you just
Yeah.
sold that through Amazon?
Kindle, Amazon Nook, the digital editions, and then the regular Barnes and Noble type editions that you could order through the bookstores and that type of thing.
And so how did you get the word out on the fact that the book even existed? I'm always wonder how people do that.
Yeah, I think it was very fortuitous. LA Weekly wrote an article, and then, as you know, different media outlets pick up on other people's stories and run with them for content. And so LA Weekly ran an article about the book and about what we discovered in the investigation, and that thing just went viral. So all these other outlets were now picking up the story, and then it began to get television attention, and I began doing interviews, and it just kind of blossomed. And next thing I know, I'm like, wow, I'm selling a lot of books, and the word's getting out there. But like I said, it doesn't matter. The fans of Tupac and Biggie, they're insatiable. They're going to buy anything and everything they can that has some relationship to Biggie and Tupac, either as artists or whatever.
And so you move on from that, and it fascinates me. You have a lot of very good luck. I mean, you work really hard.
I do, but there's so much luck.
You have a lot of luck, and I guess that's what life is, right? I mean, we just kind of I often look at what happens with me, and I'm like, most of it is just dumb luck, right?
Right.
You pick up that one client, and you're like, there's no way I ever would have gotten this client just for dumb luck.
Yeah.
And they turn out to be a great thing. So you write this book, you self-publish, and if I recall correctly, it kind of went a little bit, went a little dark for a while, and there wasn't much going on, and then didn't you do a documentary about it at some point? You made it yourself, or somebody helped? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so just a couple years after the book is published and it's kind of run its course, it's peaked and now it's valleyed, and I get a documentary filmmaker named Mike Dorsey reaches out to me. He's like, hey, Greg, I read this article. I haven't even read the book. I just read this old article. I'm fascinated with this story. I love LA history. I'd like to do a documentary. Would you like to collaborate? So we sat down. He read the book and was even more inspired to then do this documentary. So he does. It's also called Murder Rap, just after the book. And documentary does really well. It gets picked up by Reels, and next thing we know, we're like, dang, we got a successful documentary now to follow up with the book. And then that leads to some other opportunities, and ultimately the USA Network decides that they recognize that people are always going to be attracted to this story, and it's never been done in a scripted form. And there's been, innumerable documentaries, over the years, but nobody had ever done a scripted television series based on the story. And so they decided that they would produce that. And so that's what came out last year. It's called Unsolved.
And so that's a whirlwind experience in and of itself. You've told me so much about this over the years, right? It's absolutely fascinating. You're brought on, and you actually are you a writer and a consultant, or just a consultant? How does that work?
So the creator of the show, a guy named Kyle Long, he calls me up, and he speaks my language because he wants to meet at a bar and have a beer. So we do.
And this is a call out of the blue?
Call out of the blue.
Okay.
Completely out of the blue. And says, hey, Greg, I've read your book. I've seen your documentary. I'd really like to talk to you about collaborating on a scripted series. And so we sit down, and I was entertaining some other opportunities, too, at the time. But Kyle had a true passion for the story. I could tell he really, really wanted to tell this story. And then he was very interested in keeping it as authentic as possible. That that he always used to say that our currency is the truth, and I loved that. I loved the idea that he wanted to make as close as you can in television an accurate depiction of what happened in the investigation and in the murders. So he writes a pilot script, and USA buys off on it.
Based on the book? Is that how he works it?
Yeah, it's based on that and all other forms of research and information that he's.
And do you collaborate with him on that pilot script, or does he write it on his own?
Yeah, originally he wrote it on his own, and then it was kind of an interesting situation. So the USA Network really liked the script, the original one. I read it and I thought it was good, but I also thought it could be improved. And so, I offered my 2 cents. Thought there's some areas that we could probably contribute. And then, of course, in order to get the rights, the story rights and the book rights, they have to purchase those things. They have to, get entitled to do that. And so that all led to this collaboration with me and Kyle, and I began to work with him in the writer's room. He hires a bunch of writers with different backgrounds, really, skilled writers, and I sit in there every day and just kind of add my 2 cents when they're talking about something that's law enforcement related or murder related, and I'm providing all the documents and all the stuff that you need in order to accurately tell the story. And so, yeah, I was part of that whole production. And then we went into, after the writing aspect of it, we went into production, and I'd go to the set on almost a daily basis and meet with the actors and meet with the directors and, just provide the insights that they were looking for to get it right.
And what was what was your takeaway from that? Because that in and of itself was, I think, for you, an eye-opening experience about how Hollywood works, how writing works, particularly about, what was it that you said to me the one time? It was never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because there are times when you just have to kind of bite your tongue. There are, artistic liberties that need to be taken in order to do these things. They're just unavoidable. You've only got so much time, and you've got to keep that story moving forward. So you have to collapse time sometimes and rearrange events, not necessarily in the order they happened, but in the order to best keep the story flowing. So little compromises like that. But 80 to 85% of the final product was very accurate. But we did have to kind of take some creative license in areas just to get the story entertaining.
And what did you think of the final product? Because I have to be honest, and I'm sorry about this. I don't have TV, right? And I have not downloaded the damn thing yet to watch it. But I watched a lot of the trailers because they hyped it like crazy. I mean, I'm up for YouTube for at least, I don't know, a month or two. It was like every other ad before the YouTube video I was watching was that show, right? I mean,
We had a Super Bowl commercial.
They went all out.
Yeah, they really did. They advertised because they knew what they had. They knew they had a story that was going to be very, very compelling, and they have a built-in audience. I mean, there's millions of Tupac and Biggie fans around the world.
Well, and but you're being played by, was it Josh Duhamel? Is that how you said it?
Yeah.
Duhamel? Mm-hmm. That's a big star.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's huge. Like, I saw that, and I'm like, and they're in the in the commercial, they're calling him Greg Kading, and I'm like, that's who you have. That's cool.
Yeah,
right?
It was surreal. It was really a strange thing to sit and watch somebody play you, and a very genuine person too. He's a fantastic human being. He's very down to earth.
Well, you don't see him in the tabloids running around making an ass of himself, so that tends to lean towards he's probably a pretty good guy.
Yeah, pretty wholesome guy, and I think he just he loves what he does for a living, but he's also hasn't let it go to his head. He's at least my experience with him, he's a very down to earth, humble guy, fun to be around, and I think he did a great job.
what what about how they portrayed you though? Because just the commercials alone, you look like the hard charging, hard drinking, that crusty cop who's been around the block too many times.
Yeah, maybe we missed a little bit of my because I am hard charging. I worked as hard as anybody I know, and I drank as much as anybody I know. So those things are accurate. But I probably did have a little bit of a softer side. I had a pretty good sense of humor. I think I hope I still do. But at work I was a pretty low key, laid back, guy.
The characters, just in the commercials, the characters seemed really intense.
Yeah.
And that's not the Greg that I know, right?
Yeah.
You're like mellow.
Yeah, I would have moments of intensity in my real life and in the investigation, but it didn't carry through the way it's portrayed in the show, where it's just constant. But again, that's what I mean by having to kind of keep your character on an arc, and you can be multi-dimensional, but at the same time, you've kind of got to keep some consistency, I think, if you're trying to portray a character.
Oh, so it's either you're always on like that, or you're not. They don't want to see you kind of going in and out of. I can't be a little bit mellow here and then intense over here. They want you kind of intense the whole way through.
Yeah, because television and stories are always built on conflict. That's always, you've got to have your conflict constantly.
And I think I picked that up from the commercial too. There's this conflict. It appeared that they were making a larger conflict between either you and the department and you or the city in terms of revealing these things. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I was a little bit more. The conflict I had, I kept to myself. I don't want to say that I'm sinister, but I think I have a different approach of dealing with conflict as opposed to just straight on. I'll get you, but you're not going to see me coming, type of thing,
Right.
And so, but some of the interpersonal conflict was very real. Like there's this Wendell Pierce plays this African American detective from a different agency, and him and I are just butting heads throughout the whole series. And that was a real conflict that I had with a person in our task force.
And what was that about? What was the at its base level? What was that conflict about?
It was about.
And this,
It was,
let
you know
me
what it was about?
let me broaden that question
Okay.
too, because I'm going to ask you this from a cop point of view. You're a former cop. I'm a former cop. There are a lot of egos in police departments, right? A lot of egos, and a lot of times, you know it, I know it. People are put into positions that they probably have no business being in, and sometimes that manifests itself in terms of egos overplaying themselves for whatever reason, a whole host of reasons. Incompetence, overzealous, this idea that they know more than they know. Is that what was was it that kind of a thing that was going on, where this guy was maybe from a three-lettered agency and he knew more than you knew, and you're just this peon beat cop, and is that what happened, or was it something different?
It's something a little different. All those elements came into play at different times with different people. There were the egos, but for me and this individual, it came down to really just more of a control thing. Like who's in control, and why are you in control if it's not me? And
was he from a federal agency?
No, actually he wasn't. He was from my own agency.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that he thought that he knew best. I thought that I knew best, and I would just happen to kind of worked myself into more of the leadership role of the task force. And as you when you have a mission, if you don't have for lack of a better term, a chain of command, and everybody is just equals, and everybody has equal say, you don't get anywhere, right? You just end up arguing and butting heads and disagreeing. But if there's a distinct, hey, he's in charge, this is what we've been told to do, let's just go do this, then things work out much smoother and usually more successfully. And so I think that's what it came down to, is like, who put you in charge, Greg? And why are you making calling the shots oftentimes? And the reality is that I created the the task force with which we were working in, and I was the most experienced among the group in heading that kind of multi-jurisdictional effort. And I worked really, really well with all my federal partners. I recruited them all in because we had such good working relationships.
Right.
And so there was a good, there was a good sense of respect and community, but there were also these little thorns that would that would kind of pop themselves up every once in a while.
Whatever happened with him? How did that play itself out? Because I didn't see the show.
Yeah, he kind of didn't take it upon himself to interject himself into being a member of the team. He kind of just isolated himself to some degree, and wasn't very.
So the problem took care of itself, basically.
Kind of took care of itself, yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. And so after all that, the show premieres. You get to do press junkets like all over the U.S. Yeah. Having never done that before, what is that like to have to go in and say the same thing over and over and over again? Much like you're doing right now, probably.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because although the subject matter is the same and you're essentially answering the same questions, there's little nuances that allow you to kind of expand on things, or if you realize maybe you didn't answer a question the way it could, a better way to answer a question, you have an opportunity to kind of correct that. And leading up to this, long before I ever went on this kind of media tour for the show, I was doing so many interviews. Just with radio and television and other documentaries. And so I had already gotten so acclimated to having this conversation. And so once it came to a thing where we were doing it for publicity for the show, it was kind of old hat.
And that's that.
And that's that. It was fun.
Yeah.
And they treated us really well. I mean, they treat you like a
like a rock star.
They treat you like a rock star. I'd never flown first class, prior to that.
Oh, really?
So the next thing
you
I
got
know,
first class the whole way?
Everywhere you went.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Good hotels?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful hotels. I mean, I didn't even realize this is all written in like my contract that I'd never read. But supposedly they're like obligated to treat you well.
Right. Well, it's funny. What I did, I actually, now I recall you saying that you did first class, and I have a friend of mine who, his name's Christopher Gofford. He's a LA Times guy.
Okay.
And he wrote the Dirty John podcast, or the Dirty John story, and then it was the #1 podcast in America for weeks. It's an amazing story. I think I told you about it, didn't I?
I think you did.
Yeah. He was going to go to Australia, right, and talk in Australia about Dirty John and whatnot. And he was like fretting it because he's like, God, they want to send me here, and it's gonna I land, and it's a 24-hour flight, and I'm gonna be wrecked, and then they want me to do it the next day. I'm like, well, how are you flying? Well, I think I'm flying coach or something like that. I'm like, dude, stop right there. Okay, get on the phone with him right now and tell him, no, first class.
Or no class.
Yeah. Right? And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, really? Hell yeah, really, right? You're doing them a favor. You don't want to be wrecked when you get off the plane. I flew business class to Vietnam, and it was the lay flat seats. First time I'd ever flown business class. I've flown first class once domestically, which is nothing, right? But first business class to Vietnam was amazing.
Wow. Like those little pods that you lay
a little
down
pod,
in.
and you get to lie down flat, right? And they come in. It was an A380, beautiful airplane. I'd never been on one, the double-decker Airbus. It's so quiet that you can have a conversation with somebody at this level here.
Wow.
You don't have to yell. You can hear like silverware clanking in the back of the plane. It's that quiet.
Wow, that's cool.
And you get on there, and it's like they roll the cart down with any kind of wine you want, champagne. They don't sweat you when the plane is like taxiing. Like if you're standing up in the place, they're like, it's okay. White tablecloth. It doesn't get any better. It spoils you.
That's a higher level of travel. Yeah, and then you have to go back down to reality and start flying coach again.
Southwest.
Yeah, I know. Like, holy smokes! Well, at least I got to do it once, but now this makes it that much more miserable when you're subjected to these little seats that you can't even you can't move in.
Well, now what I do on Southwest, I find myself like trying to get the A right in the front, right? Mm-hmm. So I pay a little extra to get that A boarding there. Right?
Yeah.
So you get the little things in life, right? So what are you doing now?
So I'm working on a couple other projects. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take a meeting after this. I'm trying to pitch a couple other shows. And so we've written a pilot script for another show. It's a law enforcement-based dramatic series.
Are you a character in this one as well?
No, I'm not. It's going to be a fictional show, but based on real-life events. And
cases you've worked?
The backdrop of this particular show, this project, is a case I've worked, but the characters are going to be fictional, and it's really, really cool. And so we're going to hopefully be able to pitch that soon, and then I've got another project I'm working on, and then I'm working on.
Is that a secret one? You can't say what that
one
is?
No. It's just it would take too long to. It'd just take too long to explain.
Well, we've got time.
Okay.
We have more than enough time.
Well,
you can give me the nutshell version. Right?
Okay.
You can give me the what is that? The Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. So I would like to hopefully do a project that has to do with OISs, officer involved shootings.
Oh, really?
And much like we've got CSI and NCIS and all these different law enforcement oriented shows. And I have a friend, a close friend of mine, who works the Force Investigation Division at the LAPD, and he's a very veteran investigator, detective, and he's handled, I think, probably close to 200 officer-involved shootings. That's OIS, which is kind of the concept of this thing. And with the new body cams and all of this stuff that the public is getting introduced to for the first time and getting to kind of experience these environments where things happen, in the blink of an eye, and cops have to make decisions. Sometimes they're the right decisions, sometimes they're not, but getting to an opportunity to kind of get inside that world of officer-involved shootings and what is some of the ramifications and the consequences, both personally for these cops and for the families of shooting suspects or shooting victims, depending on the situation. So,
are you going to do that as more of documentary style, where you show the actual footage and you have talking heads on that, or is it going to be fictionalized?
Yeah, the concept of it is fictionalized. The concept of it is very much Are
you going to look through the eyes of that investigator who's done the 200 cases? Is that how it's going to play out, sort of?
Primarily, yeah. So you'd have a couple central characters.
Right.
And then those characters would bring you into this world that they live in and investigate. And I think it's fascinating because I sit and have conversations with him, and he tells me oftentimes, probably against department policy to be sharing it, but we'll have these conversations, and he'll say, hey, here's what happened, and this is the department's perspective on it, and blah, blah, blah. And, and you want to talk about politics, holy smoke.
Well, so have you been in an officer-involved shooting?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've never been in one. I came close to shooting a guy once, didn't obviously pull the trigger, and I was the first officer on a scene of an officer-involved shooting on one occasion. And so it's, and I worked in the most violent division in San Diego, which was Southeast. That's where all cops were killed in Southeast, if they were killed. And the officer-involved shooting is it's the most talked about and the most hyped, for good reason, thing that happens in a police department, right?
Right.
And it is, on the public side, the least understood thing out there, in my opinion, because it's so easy to look at a shooting and to say, well, that was a bad shoot, right? Like he shot the guy in the back, or the guy didn't look like he was a threat anymore, or he shot him. And there's so many dynamics in play when you are in a situation like that. And you know, what was in the cop's mind? What was the time delay? Oftentimes, and this is what people don't understand, there's like a huge time delay in your mind in terms of what happens in front of you and your reaction to what happened. There was a case of this down in San Diego. I'll never forget it. It was I think the guy's last name was Cheney. He was working in Southern Division, and guy's got a gun, and he starts a foot pursuit on the guy. So the cop is chasing him, and if I recall correctly, either he had pointed his gun at the cop and then started running, or he had shot at the cop and started running, but he still had his gun. And the suspect jumps over a wood fence, and it was one of those things where Cheney came around the corner, had the ability to shoot the guy, and took his shot. And what happened is that the suspect had jumped over the fence by the time he pulled the trigger, and the bullets went through the fence and hit the guy in the back. And so when they're doing the autopsy on the suspect, they see wood fragments in his body, and so they're like, right. You shot this guy who wasn't a threat anymore from the other side of the fence. And they brought in these experts and whatnot, and this is a known thing. Like, the public is not aware of this, but this is a known thing where what it was he had seen the guy on this side of the fence, on his side, and made that decision to shoot, but by the time delay of that happening, the guy had already gotten over the fence.
Right. And
so it's little things like that the public, and the other thing the public doesn't see, and I take this experience from me being the first officer on the scene after an officer-involved shooting. The trauma, the emotional trauma that cops have after pulling the trigger is palatable, right? I mean, there was anguish, there was anger, and it wasn't anger that they were mad at the suspect. There was anger that the suspect had put them in the position that they had to pull the trigger. Right? And this was a unique shooting, but those are the things that the public just doesn't understand about shootings. I mean, it's not a black and white thing. These cops had horrible dreams and nightmares about this for like weeks afterwards. It's not...
Yeah, I think it's tough that, you know, you're trained for it, and you go in there knowing that it's always a possibility, and you're subjective. You know, all of us, you know, in law enforcement are subjected to those times where it was very close, but fortunately we didn't have to fire our weapon. I think these days there's, if you know that you've done what you had to do, and you're confident that, you know, it was you know, my life was in danger, or somebody else's life was in danger, so I made that decision. Yeah, unfortunately I had to shoot somebody, you know, and they're either dead or they're not, but either way, it's facing the inquiries and facing the departments, you know, and it's necessary. You've got to look into these things, but that's where the fear comes from, in my opinion. You're more afraid of what are the ramifications going to be, because I feel like I had to do what I had to do, but is that going to be the way that they perceive it? And
I think that's worse now than when we were cops.
Absolutely.
Right? There was not the kind of second guessing. I mean, it was getting that way, certainly by the tail end of my career, and maybe even by the tail end of yours, but not to the degree that it is. Nowadays, it's just everything is so much under a microscope. I mean, literally, I don't know where the statistic is from, but I've seen this statistic that cops are actually less likely to pull the trigger on an African-American simply because of that. They don't want to be second-guessed. And that's
Or the perception that they did it because the suspect happened to be black.
Exactly. And that's a problem, right? Because now what you're doing is you're putting the police officers and the public at risk.
Potentially, yeah, because if you're hesitating because of your fear of repercussions.
What happened? You said you were an officer-involved shooting. Mm-hmm. Do you mind talking about it?
No, I was coming down the street.
We're patrol. How long ago was this?
Yeah, so I was in patrol. We were in uniform, but we were in unmarked cars, and I was working some type of crime suppression unit. Had my partner, I think it was Eddie Gamboa at the time, and then we had these two
Eddie Gamboa. That's the perfect cop partner name.
And we had a couple of school police officers that were riding along with us. So there's 4 of us in the car. Come around the corner, and it's in a gang neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles, and we see down in the middle of the street there's this big Donnybrook going on. So I accelerate towards the fight, and as soon as they see the car and then they realize, oh, there's cops inside that car, they all begin to disperse. And there's this one particular individual that he begins to walk away, but he's walking away in a manner that I'm like, oh, it looks like he's concealing something. And he's going the opposite direction to me. So my car's heading this way. He's walking on the sidewalk the opposite way. So I put it in reverse and begin to back up to track him. And I'm telling him out the window, hey, stop. I want to talk to you. Hey, stop. Hey, put your fucking hands up and stop. Well, I get out of the car and then he runs. And so I chase him, very short distance. He runs into a yard, small chain link fence. He runs through the yard. I get to the fence, and now he's up on the elevated porch. So he ran up like 3 steps. And as he's going up the stairs, a gun falls out of his waistband. And so I'm coming right into the yard. I see it right there, plain as day on the deck. And he looks at me, I look at him, and don't do it.
Right.
Don't pick it up.
Right.
I said, don't even think about it, man.
Right.
Of course, he picks it up. So, not knowing what his intentions are, I'm not going to give him that extra second to turn.
Sure.
So I fire my weapon, and it hits him in the buttock because he's turned a little bit. He's kind of canted, and the bullet goes in through the meaty flesh of his ass, comes out the inner thigh in his groin area, goes through his scrotum. So in one side of his ball sack, out the other, and then into his other leg. So literally like 5 holes with one bullet.
And you just shot once?
Just one time.
Wow, that's pretty good control.
Yeah. And he kind of goes down, and then the front door opens, and it's one of those, South Central metal screen doors.
The ghetto grate.
You can't get through, so you can't see through that.
Right.
And so the door opens, a couple of guys grab him, and they pull him into the house.
Oh, no.
And then the door closes.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, now I know I have a shooting suspect, a victim.
Victim and suspect,
yeah. And so I run out of the yard, and I tell my partner, Eddie.
Does he still have the gun, or is the gun on the porch still?
He had it with him. He still had it in his hand. Yeah, so he took it in the house with him.
Today, a barricaded suspect.
Yeah. And so, yeah. So I tell Eddie, as I turn, I run back out, and I tell Eddie, hey, set up a perimeter. I'm going to go around the block because I'm assuming I got to get on the other side of this house in case they go flying out the back door.
Right.
So I think I was on 23rd Street. I get down to 24th Street. I'm just rounding the corner. My headlights are on, and sure enough, here's the individual, and he's being carried like by 2 guys, like a professional football player getting carried off the field. He's got his arms around their shoulders, and I'm accelerating towards them. Those 2 guys dropped him like a sack of potatoes. They're like, no, we're not getting any further into this with you. So they drop him into the middle of the street, and I run up to him, and I was like, hey, man, don't move. I don't see the gun. Don't move. And he's like, Officer, help me, I've been shot.
Did you say to him?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, hey, I'm the dude who shot you.
Fucking clown. So, yeah, and we find the gun had been discarded in the backyard of the house, and so it all worked out. And
did they sweat you over it?
No, I think that once it was.
What year was that?
That would have been 93.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't have gotten sweated back then too much. Yeah.
I mean, it was good shooting. I mean, it had to. What are you going to do? I'm not going to sit in there and wait for him to pick it up and then make a decision whether or not he's going to pull the trigger.
No.
Another time, real quick though, this is an equally interesting kind of story. My partner, a guy named Chris Montoya, and I were going down the street. We were working gangs, uniformed gangs. So again, we were in uniform but in an unmarked car, and almost an identical situation. We're coming down the street, and we see a fight taking place, and at these kind of Mexican cowboys, we used to call them Sinaloas, and there's this fight in the middle of the street, and as we pull up, these guys are hammered, and they're fighting this one black guy. So there's like 5 of these Hispanic guys and one black guy, and there's a Donnybrook going on. So the Hispanic guys all stumble over to the sidewalk, and they're completely annihilated, just drunk as can be. And I'm trying to give them police Spanish commands, which I'm horrible at. But anyways, siéntese.
Yeah, volteese, íncase.
And so I'm trying to get them under control. And, I'm not really cognizant of what's happening with my partner. Oh, by the way, so in the back, we also have a passenger this time. It's an LA Times reporter who's in the car with us doing stories about gangs. So he's on a ride along. And so it's almost a repeated scenario. And I get out of the car. I'm trying to corral these Hispanics and figure out what's going on. Unbeknownst to me, I hear boom, and I turn and I see my partner's got his gun extended, and I see this African American guy falling into the parkway of the street, into the grass. And I look at him and I remember saying, "Chris, you can't just shoot people." Like, you can't just shoot people, man. And he's like, "Greg, he's got a gun." I'm looking around. I'm like, "Oh, no, he doesn't. There's no gun here." And so, we get on the radio, call for backup, and then we know the troops are coming. And he's like, "Greg, I swear he had a gun." So we ultimately go over and roll him over, and sure enough, there's a gun. He fell on top of it.
Right, okay.
So there was a gun. Well, I say, "What the hell happened, Chris?" And he explains to me, he goes, "Greg, you had your back turned, and you were over here paying attention to these guys. That guy turned around, he pulled a gun out, and was walking right up to the back of your head. And I never saw it. And had Chris not been there, and had Chris not been on top of his game and being observant, that guy was likely just going to come up and shoot me in the back of the head." And so Chris's reaction probably saved my life.
That's one of those ones that leaves you speechless.
Yeah, and that's why he's the greatest partner I've ever had.
Oh my God! There you were, Chris. You can't shoot people.
Yeah. And then I love you, man.
The first thing I think is, did you guys just shoot people at random?
Yeah. So that was my first reaction. I was like, "Chris, what are you doing?" And,
it's that's the one thing that I really miss about police work. And maybe the same is for you, right? And I think this is why, like, combat veterans really miss that camaraderie, right? That feeling of closeness that you have with your partner, and the time that you spend with them, and that they've got your back and you've got their back, and I really miss that about the department, right? I miss those personalities. I miss that camaraderie. I miss that just sense of I don't know what you want to call it, fraternity, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And those are the things that I remember the most, right? The other stuff, whatever. But those things for sure.
Yeah, I think in that profession, or whether it's the military or maybe law enforcement, you're subjected to environments that are just not normal environments, and so then you're naturally gonna have a kind of a unique bond with people that are sharing that with you, and you are relying on them. And there's my last story illustrates how important those bonds are.
Yeah, big time.
But I think that it's because you're subjected to these unfortunate environments, whether it's war or some of the things that we encounter as officers in the street, and there's a uniqueness to it that kind of forges those relationships, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I miss the people, but I don't miss the work at all.
Everybody. I left way early on. I chose not to put the golden handcuffs on, and left. And everybody I talked to, it's two things actually. Everybody I talked to in the past and currently always says, you made the right move, right? Like, they regret having stayed, because the environment in police departments now is just it's toxic. And the second thing that I found really fascinating, I went a couple years ago. I started around New Year's, going down and doing a ride along with my old partner. And so my old beat partner is a sergeant now at Traffic Division down in San Diego. And so, once you attain the position of sergeant in most departments, your workload decreases drastically. Yeah. And because he's in traffic, he can go anywhere he wants in the city. And so, just for fun, I go down and I, at the New Year, do a ride along for the night. We drive around and do whatever. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat was that everyone I came into contact with, all the old cops, there's a lot at that division now that I worked with and whatnot, and even the ones that I didn't work with, but who are younger, literally the first thing out of their mouth was what the retirement date was. Mm-hmm. And when I was a cop, and I'm sure when you were a cop, we didn't think about retirement in those terms. We were looking forward to it like everybody else, but we were like excited to get out in the street and excited to go do our job, and we wanted to go arrest people, and we wanted to, hopefully get into a foot pursuit. And, when you're younger, you're like, yeah, I want to get in a shooting, those are the things that you look forward to. And there was none of that. It was like this like gloom and doom, and can't wait to get out of here. And it's too bad that it's come that far for these police departments now.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, is it a cycle? Will we go, because law enforcement does have its kind of ups and downs and seems to cycle through things. What I've always observed was that, in my opinion anyways, is that cops always have a tendency of perceiving law enforcement or their jobs with the previous generation. Mm-hmm. And so we're always just a bit behind the curve. And of course, things have changed, so you can't do police work like the previous generation did.
And when you're saying that, are you specifically talking about the term we always say "back in the day," like that?
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Kind of mentality. Remember, we could do that back in the day.
Back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. So keep going.
And so you want to, you had more discretion and more freedom to go out and do what you thought you needed to do back in the day, and unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. You have to police under current conditions. You can't think of the things or the way it was done and then try to apply those today. And I just think that is a general, that's just a kind of a general paradigm in law enforcement, is that we're not necessarily very progressive, although technology and everything changes. We don't change as fast as we should in order to attend to society's expectations of law enforcement today. Now, the caveat to that is if we policed the way that the public would ask us to, I think we'd be equally ineffective. Because they want it both ways, right? They want it both ways.
They want you to go out and they want you to bust all the bad guys. Then you start busting all the bad guys. They're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Like the way that you're doing
exactly.
it. Exactly. And cops play by the rules. The bad guys don't.
That's right.
And so there's always going to be an uneven deck. And in order to kind of get things done, you've got to be proactive and aggressive. And it's just unfortunate that we haven't figured out exactly how to do this.
Well, one of the things that I find troubling, and most of and this could be a generational thing as well, although I don't recall it being this way. I mean, every generation after the 1930s has softened up, right? I mean, like every generation of cop after the 1930s has softened up. So the hard-hitting tactics that they may have had in the 1930s, obviously we don't have those now. So there's always going to be that. And for the most part, it makes sense, right? Society calms down. It's not as, Wild West as it used to be. But having said that, across the board, when I came into police work, I really wanted to be a cop. Wow. I mean, that was like, boy, I want to be a cop. I want to go out. I want to bust bad guys. I want to do all these things. Now with the new generation, especially with the millennials and whatnot, they come in and it's like there's not that passion that we had. They're not risk takers, so they're not willing to really get out there the way that we were, and they think that because they're the entitled generation, they think that after 2-3 years they should be working homicide, and so there's this real weird kind of management issues that they're having with these millennials now. And I've talked to them when I was on the ride along and stuff, and they're more willing to talk. Like when I was young and a cop, you sat down, you shut up, you just you did your job, right? And you worked your way through. And now it's this, they're talking all the time. They're on their iPads, their iPhones. I mean, it's a different world now. It's an interesting world.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's tough to have that internal desire or motivation to go out there and be that first line of defense in society, and to be the guy that, because it's exciting, it's fun to get involved in, the chases and being there when, drama and excitement's happening. But at the same time, there just seems to need to be a different perspective. Is like, hey, and this is going to sound horrible, cops are going to just think I've completely lost it, but actually just do it exactly the way they've asked you to do it. It's not going to be as exciting, and you're probably not going to get a whole bunch of support from the people around you, but that's self-preservation. And that's just letting the department decide how you get to be a cop, and that's the way it should be done, because it's in your best interest. You'll have a safer, more a less stressful career. Go out there. If they say don't separate from your partner when you chase somebody, just don't. Let the guy get away.
Right.
Because of course you're advantage if you split up and you go around 2 buildings opposite directions, you catch the guy. But this is a perspective that cops should just take. And then when society sees that we're not as effective as we could be, then maybe they'll arm you with the policies and with the support that you need in order to use that discretion on your own. Because if you just did it, honestly, think about this. This will really put it in perspective. What if cops actually obeyed every traffic law the way they're supposed to, right? Well, cops are not allowed to drive the way cops drive.
Right. Well, nothing would get
per
done.
the law. Nothing would get done. But you would be abiding by what they've asked you to do, which is to abide the law.
Well, and therein lies the problem, right? Because every business, and I'm learning this now in my business, right? I'm learning about process. And every business that wants to be a good business wants to make a process that is dumbed down to the lowest common denominator so that anybody can do it. And that's what the policy and procedure in police work is. It's this process of dumbing things down so that anybody with a high school diploma who can make it through the academy can do these things. And that's the problem, right? Because police work it's not a system of processes that you can abide to each and every time, because, as you know, the situations that we are thrust into as police officers are varied and unique. On a daily basis, it may be a routine call that becomes unroutine very quickly for any number of reasons, some of which you've thought of already, some of which you haven't. And so that's the problem that I always found with police departments, and I understand the problem now, right? Better now that I'm in business for myself, and I have employees, and I have to manage people, right? And they're always struggling with this scale of giving them the freedom to make decisions, but not too much freedom so that they go overboard with the authority that they have. I don't like to use the term power because it's authority. And how do we keep that in balance so that it just doesn't go overboard one way or the other? And then, so that's the management side, right, that we haven't talked about. And then what we have talked about, the public side, that's always screwing that balance up as well, right?
Yeah, but I think really what trumps that is not that there's not, as you know, tremendous expectations to qualify to be a police officer, right? And education should probably be something that's more required.
Well, I'll tell you, though, on that note, I'm sorry, but the reason they have to keep that requirement is I'm convinced now it's not a popular job anymore.
Right.
Right. And it's hard to find people.
Yeah. Qualified people.
Right. But it's just hard to find people, regardless on the qualification part. But keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. The department, in my opinion, is always first concerned with liability.
Yeah.
And so going back to my example, let's say there's a domestic violence call. You're dispatched to go handle a domestic violence call. 415, man, assaulting woman, whatever. You go to this, and you're 6 miles away. Well, it's a code 2 call, which means you adhere to all traffic laws, right?
Right.
So you go there the way you would drive, abiding all the traffic laws, and it's going to take you 20, 30 minutes to get there. And people already say, where the hell were you? Can you imagine what would happen but the department does that, because now when you're trying to get there as fast as you can and you don't come to a complete stop before you make that right turn on a red, and now you pull out and you're driving a little bit overzealous because you're trying to get there, you get in a traffic accident. Is the department going to say, hey, good job trying to get there that quick? No, what they're going to say is, hey, you're now going to be disciplined.
Yes.
Because you overdrove.
Well, you violated department policy.
You have violated the law.
Well, and policy.
And policy.
And policy, right? Well, the other thing, though, this is the one that departments always can fall back on, right? Regardless of policy. Conduct unbecoming. Right, that's like the catch-all, right? Yeah, you can do anything you want with that one. So, I find that police departments are fascinating places. The politics behind policing is fascinating, not just the politics externally, but the politics internally. I think that listen, crime is down. We don't need maybe as aggressive policing as possible, but we do need to enable and empower our police officers to have the ability to be aggressive and to take action when needed, and not have to think that they're going to be second guessed every time.
Yeah, it puts them in too much of a second guessing dilemma, and that endangers you.
It does. It does.
It endangers you too.
And it ultimately endangers the public, right? Because if you're hesitating to shoot somebody that needs to be shot, and you don't, and then they go out and they do something, that's the chain of events that can happen. They can go out and they could hurt somebody else.
Yeah, but adversely, then we got to talk about like all the horrible cops and all the damage that they've done, and all of the just clear, egregious.
Do you want to hear something
activity
scary? Do you want to hear something scary?
Yeah.
A friend of mine, an old partner, who was the welfare officer for San Diego PD. And the welfare officer, not welfare like, handouts, but just making sure cops were okay. Mm-hmm. So he dealt with all of the internal issues. 20% of the department is either in rehab for alcoholism or on depressants, antidepressants of some kind, suicide issues. 20%. Now, do you think that is just an issue with San Diego PD, or does every department have 20% of their workforce with those types of issues? I would argue all of them have that issue.
I would argue society has that issue.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And we're human beings, right? So it's going to bleed over. But that's the problem, right? You're hiring human beings who have human issues, who come in and they're flawed, and some of them are more flawed than others. So, you're always departments are always going to have to respond to the worst of the worst in their ranks.
Yeah. And I think I'm referring more to those people that knowingly and willingly violate their power. They know,
like Rampart. Are you talking like Rampart?
Yeah. Well, obviously that's a well-known well-known example of that. But I'm just talking about the guys, not because they have an alcohol problem or because they're addicted to painkillers or whatever, or they have a bad marriage and so things get out of control at home, maybe. Not that. I'm talking about the cops that actually go out and do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that intentionally go out and break the law and violate people's rights. And I think it's a very, very small percentage, you know, maybe 5% at most.
Mm-hmm.
But that 5% is enough to absolutely contaminate the entire perception of cops. You only have to see one guy, you know, beating somebody into submission that clearly is not justifiable. And then if you don't have the insights that we have about what might have preceded that, or then you just see a cop using his
using force excessively on that one.
Yeah.
Well, and then,
or using his position as a police officer to take it, you know, to
I
thinking
think
that they're exempt.
Yeah, and it's worse today though. It's magnified by social media, by somebody with a phone that takes maybe the tail end of something that is unjustified or justified, and making that look bad. I mean,
I don't know.
The 5% screwed up cops beforehand, but now that number's been expanded out, the percentage, because things can be taken out of context so easily when you're taking video of something and you're not explaining what happened ahead of time. Or I'm not minimizing what you're saying in any way. I'm agreeing with it essentially.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about when it's just a perception. I'm not talking about when a cop is perceived to do something bad, but when you know better or when you learn that there's
more. You're saying that they're actually, I mean, it's clear cut. He went too far.
Hey, listen. I worked gangs in the late 80s and 90s. And what we did as gang suppression officers, looking back, it was criminal. The way that we dealt with it. Yeah. But it was an accepted practice at the time. It was the way we got things done. But if you take that and really analyze it, what we were doing was wrong.
Yeah.
You know, but we justified it because it was the war on gangs and we're protecting these communities and this is what needed to be done to be effective. We didn't have the right to do that. If we were enforcing the law as expected, yeah, the gangs would have ran rampant. It would have been a mess. But we took it upon ourselves to give ourselves the authority to go out and do things that we believed needed to be done. And I'm just being transparent and honest. And that's what I meant about generations try to do things the way that they used to be done, instead of doing them the way that they're expected to be done at the current time. You know, but we were extremely heavy-handed. And the stuff that I witnessed from really good cops and good people, but they had rationalized their behavior because they believed that what they were doing was in the best interest of the public. But the public had never asked you to do this.
You know, so I have a little different take on that. And this is going to sound like maybe I'm an apologist or I'm being soft on that, because certainly there are times when I look back and I got a few hits in too many, right? And you know, for me, it's just a fine line, right? I don't know that it's rationalization as much as, again, for the lack of a better term, stress. And maybe that's a cop-out, but I found, at least for me, and I think in the 80s and 90s it was 10 times, it was probably 50 times worse in terms of the level of street violence that was occurring when you were out doing gangs than versus when I came in the early 90s or the mid 90s, right? That stuff had really petered out. You're asking guys to go out on a daily basis and to deal with incredibly dangerous people. I mean, back then, they were incredibly dangerous people back then. It can't be minimized. And I think that when you ask guys to do that day in and day out, that's going to get to you. I mean, that's like literally being in a war zone every day, 10 hours a day or 12 hours, whatever your shifts were back then. nonstop, right? From the time you go 10-8 to the time you get back to the sub, 10-17. And is that the right one? I can't remember.
We didn't use those
We didn't
codes.
use those codes. That's right. You're LAPD. You guys are special.
Yeah, or so we thought.
So you thought. And so does that justify getting in an extra lick or two? Does that justify going overboard like you discussed? And there could be a ton of ways you go overboard. We all know it. Well, cops know what those are. And I say, yeah, you're right. It shouldn't have been done. But, man, you're asking these guys to go out day in and day out and deal with the worst of the worst. Hey, you know what? There is a little bit to be said for the fact that these guys are stressed out. They're tired. They've been dealing with this Yahoo 15 million times. The justice system isn't working correctly. They've been tasked to get rid of this stuff. And listen, sometimes the ends justify the means, or the means justify the ends, the means justify the ends, right? And by no means am I condoning what happened, but I just see it from a little different perspective.
Yeah.
And granted, Greg, there is a fine line there between just willfully going out and violating the law and violating people's rights, right? I mean, it's clear cut, right? Like if you've got a guy who's out there who's just like constantly planting dope on somebody, or planting a gun on somebody, or just outright fabricating a report.
Well, here's a good example of a fine line. So you're a patrol officer, you're going down the street, known gang hangout, you go to get out of your car, somebody takes off running. He takes off running, he's holding his waistband, he goes around the side of a house, you're trying to catch him, he gets over a fence, you eventually catch up with him, no gun. So you come back, and you trace back your steps, and then you find the gun, next to a trash can. All right. Well, what did we do? We convinced ourselves that guy had that gun, right? So you write that the way that will stand up in court. What you can't do is go to court and say, well, I thought he had a gun. No, I never saw him throw it. When I caught him, is it absolutely possible that gun was already there? Yeah, it is. So we would write the report, we saw him toss the gun.
Okay.
So,
right? That's a problem, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But that was the standard. That was
I see.
the way that it was
so
done.
our standards are
because
different
we knew that kid had the gun, and we knew that the only way to hold him accountable for it was to tell the story in that way. So you'd rationalize it. You're like, hey, I'm going to get this kid off the street because he's got a gun. He's a danger to everybody else, and unless I tell the story this way, he's going to be released because we can't prove it. So those are the little exceptions to the rule. But it's like anything else. Those things have a tendency. Well, if you take a little exception here, then the next one's that's just the unfortunate reality of it all. But I understand it all. I get it. I know, in my mind, I'm like, okay, we did this because we thought we were doing the right thing for the community.
Right.
But nobody asked us to do it that way. They asked us to do it the other way. Let that kid go. Let him get his next gun, and hopefully he doesn't shoot anybody with it. But that was the precarious nature of these environments.
And I think that's probably where our view separates them, because that's something that I did not grow up with in the police department, right? Like in San Diego, we would have been like, well, didn't see the gun, we got the gun off the street. We wouldn't have written the report that way, right? I think more in terms of use of force, really, more than anything else.
Yeah.
Not to make a light of that subject, but I mean, there were times where, because of the stress, you got a few extra licks in. Was that what they asked us to do? No. But was it what happened? Yeah. But we weren't out there shooting people with no guns and things like that indiscriminately. But I mean, those are the things that I think of when I think of cops going over the edge. But what you're talking about, that's clear cut. That's like that's a slippery slope very quickly.
Yeah, and it's just
and that's really what LAPD. I mean, at the end of the day, Rodney King exposed that mentality for LAPD beyond the use of force stuff.
Listen, not just LAPD. I think every law enforcement agency in Los Angeles County has had a policy that if you run, there's going to be consequences to pay. That was just the standard operating procedure. Obviously, it's not written in policy, but that was the mentality of cops. If you run from us, there's going to be hell to pay when we catch you.
Right? That's unwritten.
But
unwritten rule.
And then Rodney King happens, and the world is seeing what was happening very frequently, just not on camera. And so what happens? Of course, there's a big revision and all of this, public outcry about police brutality, as there should have been. I mean, that was obviously Rodney King was an illustration of a bunch of cops who had lost control of their emotions and in poor leadership. However, did you notice that immediately after that, man, high-speed pursuits were on the news every night. Prior to that, you'd never hear of them. Hardly ever would there be these, people, because there was a precedent set. Don't run. Well, once it became obvious that, hey, you can run and there's no consequences. Maybe you go to jail for a bunch of traffic violations, but, and then all of a sudden high-speed pursuits became a nightly news story everywhere. So there's always this give and take. There's pros and cons to everything.
Police work is a fascinating. I mean, you can see now why TV shows are made about police work. You recommended The Wire a long time ago. You said that was really a good. I need to sit down and watch that.
Best
apparently.
Police procedural ever made. The internal politics, the interpersonal dynamics, just the Wire was magnificent. Best police procedural ever made.
I think it's on Netflix now too, isn't it? I think you can watch the whole thing.
Probably.
Yeah, it's like from 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like 6 seasons. It's fantastic.
Huh. Well, I'll have to watch that. So, what's upcoming for you? Anything good other than the officer? You're a PI like myself, a private investigator like myself. You keep busy with that?
I stay busy with that.
Is that a side job now, relatively speaking? Or, is entertainment kind of more the arc for you? Or?
No, PI work is actually interfering with the stuff I wanted to. I would much more be involved in the creative processes of producing shows and stuff like that. I've gotten kind of the bug,
right?
And I really enjoy it. I'm sure it's like anything else, you do it enough, it'll become mundane. But it's exciting now, and I'm hoping to continue in it. So yeah, I do the PI work, and just renovated my house, which has been a 6-month process.
I think that's more than a 6-month process for you, because you've been ongoing with that for how long now? For a few years, I think.
Yeah, I probably just keep telling myself it's only 6 months, because if I face the reality, I'd know that I'm sick in the head. That I just.
Well, I've been out there. It's like you got a nice little kind of palatial estate there on on that corner lot of yours. I mean, it's pretty nice.
It's cool. I like it, but I just keep changing, and I've got to stop doing that.
It sounds like you have too much money and too much time on your hands.
It's it's one or the other. Either you have the time and not the money, or you end up with the money and then no time. It's very rare that you can do both, which is why it's taken me so long. And then me and my wife I think next month we're gonna go backpacking through Europe. It'll be.
How long?
We're looking at 6 weeks. Potentially trying to hit all the the Eastern European countries, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, Germany, France. Anyways, yeah, we're going to go over there and put a backpack on and just see where we go. Probably end up at a lot of breweries.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like fun.
That'll be it.
Well, Greg, thanks for talking, man.
Yeah, have me back.
I will. We're one day we're going to explode. We'll be all over the place, and you'll want to come back.
It's been lively. I appreciate the conversation, and it's good to get a lot of this stuff kind of discoursed out, even though there's different sometimes perspectives. It's like you were saying before this sit down, people just can't effectively disagree anymore. They can't have conversations without it becoming, it's either my way and you have to listen. And it's just rare anymore to be able to engage in.
Everybody, well, listen, that's the primary reason for the show, right? There are a group of people already who are having long format discussions with thinkers, and they're talking about those things that make us uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily want to make people uncomfortable, but I do think that in today's world we have essentially distilled everything down to, well, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? Mm-hmm. Right? And then from there, well, then your viewpoint is either valid or invalid, right, because you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. Right. And I was a political beast for years, right? I mean, like I lived and breathed politics. And as I've gotten older and perhaps wiser or not, I look at the politics side of thing, and it's toxic. It's wrecking us as a nation. Mm-hmm. It's wrecking us as neighbors. It's wrecking us in terms of our relationships with people. And do we want to live in a world where we are going to have our tribes of either Republican or Democrat, and then either support you or not support you just based on those two factors alone? Or are we going to engage in discussion and engage in conversation with somebody regardless of what their viewpoint is, and just have a respectful conversation with somebody? You know, like my intention on here, I want to get in a socialist. Now, I'm not into socialism at all. Like, that's not my bag, right? I mean, I think socialism is
But at least allow a person to explain why they believe in it and what, how they see it playing out. I mean, it's great to at least allow somebody to elaborate and then be educated with their knowledge, whether you're going to accept it as right or wrong.
Well, and I think that if your sole goal in life is just to shout the other person down and to shut them out, then you might be right. Right? You may be 100% right. This person needs to be shouted down, and we don't need to hear what they have to say. Right? Maybe. Mm-hmm. But who walks away from that looking more legitimate? The person who shouted down or the person who walked away? Because if you gave the person who walked away that chance to say their bit, the mere words that come out of their mouths oftentimes will just discredit them right then and there on the spot. Mm-hmm. Right? They'll discredit themselves. And so you gained everything by allowing them to talk. Because you could see then, is what they're saying good or is it not good? Mm-hmm. Or are there some merits to it, or are there other merits that aren't good, right? I mean, and so we've got to get back to that. We are hyper polarized right now.
Yeah, we are. It's almost disheartening to see people, especially in the social media age, where their perspectives are so superficial, but yet they hold them with such passion. And like, well, hold on a second. You can't just alienate this entire group of people because they don't have the same exact perspective that you do. And you not only just brush them off, you become hostile and aggressive to the point where you're like, whoa, and I feel the generation of kids today, boy, it just must feel like being in. It's got to just feel like the ground is never under your feet.
That's right. It's constant barrage. It's a constant barrage. And the social media, that's what I liken it to, social media. Social media is like being at the checkout stand at the grocery store 24/7, where all you get to look at are the tabloids, right? Normally at the old days, before social media, the only time you got the tabloids and the crazy was when you were in the grocery store.
Standing in line.
Yeah. And you would look at it and you'd, see the Michael Jackson from Mars or whatever, right?
Exactly.
Right, and you would chuckle, and you might pick one up and leaf through it and then put it down. Mm. And there was a small group of people who would buy that stuff, right? Now, 24/7. 24/7, you are standing in front of the tabloid section. And what anybody wants to yell at you can yell at you, and they do it from the comfort and the anonymity of home. Mm-hmm. And so I know for a fact, from talking to younger people, it destroys them. They are literally destroyed by this. And that's why people like, do you know Jordan Peterson?
Mm-mm.
Jordan Peterson is this professor in Toronto. He's made a big splash with young people because he talks about with historical references, talking about the meaning of life, basically. What's the meaning of life? And he's got a very famous book out now. I can never remember the name. What's the name of it, Mike?
12 Rules for Life, Antidote to Chaos.
Yes, 12 Rules for Life, The Antidote to Chaos. And it's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. And there's this starvation out there by younger people who have grown up with all this social media and all this constant pounding on them. And they're looking around and they're like, what the hell's the point?
Right.
And so there's guys like that are trying to bring these kids back to earth, because you're right. They're everything is a crisis. Everything is changing all the time.
And they feel hopeless.
Hopelessness.
I like the way Michael chimed in, though. I think that should be an ongoing thing, kind of like the Robin for Howard Stern.
Yeah, we put a piece of glass and he can have a microphone, and every now and then we'll throw it over to him.
I love it.
Yeah.
Michael probably has a lot of good things to say. I wish I'd heard some of them.
Yeah, Michael, he wants to be anonymous in all of this.
I see.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I'm going to drag him into it every now and then.
Michael, just a quick random question. If the next president was going to be a female, who would you choose as the next female president of the United States?
We're not going to talk politics here, are we?
It can be anybody in the world.
It'll have to depend.
You just can't pull anything off the top of your head?
Oh, you mean like if I were to choose a female right now?
Yeah, right now, just anybody that you would like to see be the president of the United States.
Beyonce.
Interesting.
Beyonce.
Interesting.
I'm just kidding.
You know what's funny?
I love it. I was going to say Miley Cyrus. That's who I'm going to. I'm voting for Miley Cyrus, and then Tom Cruise is her running mate.
So, on Beyonce, we're getting totally off a tangent, but I don't care. Did you see back in, there's two things that make me laugh about Beyonce, and it's partly about the culture and where we're headed in this country. And let me preface this by saying, there's a very, maybe it's not famous, but there's a good Simpsons episode where Lisa is president of the United States.
Oh, sweet.
Okay, so they do a forward, they do a future kind of Simpsons.
Yeah.
What happens in the future? And Lisa's the president of the United States. And there's a scene where Homer and Marge are in bed, right? And they're watching TV. And in the background, you hear like moaning, right? Like sexual moaning. And Marge looks over at Homer and she says, Fox TV became a porn channel so subtly I didn't even notice. And I think about that with Beyonce, because there was a scene, Beyonce did this like Super Bowl, maybe it was Super Bowl or it was some big thing, or the Grammys or whatever. It was a performance. And literally all she did was sit on stage with her legs in a leotard, with her legs wide open, and sing this song, right? And I watched that and I'm like, we're like only a few steps away from basically just two performers on stage having sex
And singing.
Not even singing, right? There's just music in the background.
Lip singing.
and then the Simpsons correctly called it, right? I mean, they became porn channels so subtly we didn't even notice. So
Says the guy who gets drunk with priests.
Well, listen,
I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
Now, when you were sitting there drinking, and do you bless the whiskey? Does that change anything?
No, but I mean, like we do, we have dinner, and we certainly say a prayer before dinner. But
God, please don't let me get a hangover.
Please don't let me have a hangover. Well, it's funny that we mentioned this, or that I mentioned this story. Maybe this is why it's fresh in my mind. So one of the priests that was there that night, he is not at my parish anymore. But anyway, he came back. He's at a local parish again. So I actually took him out to lunch yesterday, and so we caught up. And when I was taking him back, he says, "Well, those old priests that we used to hang out with, they come every Friday night to have, a lot of Fridays to have dinner. Do you want to come over again?" And I was like, "Absolutely, sure."
Dinner, code word for cocktails.
Cocktails. They got to drink. I mean, come on, those guys. It's a hard job. And let me tell you something. This may fascinate you, because it fascinates me. cops and priests are actually more closely aligned in the types of work that they do than you would imagine. There is
crisis intervention.
There's that. There's dealing with people's problems, right? There's dealing with death. I don't know about you, but for me, when I was a cop,
Writing off the booze as a business expense.
writing off the booze. But dealing with death was a big deal for me
Right.
when I was a cop,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And they deal with a lot of that. And I found after hanging out with priests over the years that the same things that affect cops, bureaucracy, bad bosses. I mean, maybe everybody has to deal with that too. But like it's similar. The way the diocese runs,
So structured.
yeah, and a police department, the way they run, it's almost identical.
Oh wow.
And then you take the people.
So what would a cardinal be, like an assistant chief? If the Pope's the chief.
The Pope's the chief. Cardinals, I guess, would be assistant chiefs. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
what
and
about
then
a
a bishop would be a
instead?
captain.
Oh, okay.
Right,
Captain. Well, he's
captain.
got rank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bishop would be captain, and then after that you've got the pastors.
Mm-hmm.
So the pastors would be like lieutenants, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably the lieutenant sergeant, so to speak. And then you've got the vicar, who's the assistant priest, right? And so they're going to be like the, I guess they'd be like the sergeant. So you have lieutenant, sergeant, right? Sergeant, and then, deacons.
So what's an altar boy, like a cadet?
Yeah.
It's like a cadet.
I don't even think altar service now, that's just like, okay, I want my kid to be involved in church. Go be an altar boy for a few years, right?
So the person who's in charge is like the wine barrels. That's like the armory.
That's the
That's the guy that hands out the guns, except he hands out the goods.
The sergeant at arms.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Huh. And the nuns are, where do they fall in? Are they the dispatchers?
I don't know what nuns would probably records.
Oh, they have records and
keepers.
dispatching. Oh, keeping the women in their place, huh? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's an old system,
Just
right?
like- yep.
The patriarchy, the patriarchy rules. No, there are a lot of people are negative on the Catholic Church, right? I get that, but there is a lot to be said for the notion of celibacy for the priests. And that they are married to the church. And what I've learned over the years is that there's a real beauty to that marriage to the church that the priests have, and one of the loyalty that they have to one another and to the church is quite significant, and it's similar to being a cop. Right, the loyalty that we have to one another as cops, not necessarily to the department per se.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Well, I don't want to stir anything up.
No, you
but-
can though. Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you think that there are some adverse consequences to celibacy?
There's no doubt that I think there's a couple of issues at play there, right? I think that the type of person that wants to be a priest is a unique and interesting personality to begin with, right? And it's also going to potentially attract people. So the question I think you're asking is celibacy the reason that we have the sex abuse stuff that happens in the church, right? Is that kind of where, that's a
because I think
legitimate
it's-
question.
Yeah, because I think it's disproportionate, and if it's disproportionate, I think there must be some type of explanation for it.
Sure. So I think the Spotlight. Do you remember that movie that came out? It was
Yeah.
about how the Boston Globe.
great movie.
Oh, it's amazing, right? Yeah. And it's how essentially the story is how the Boston Globe figures out that all the sex abuse is happening in the priest with the priests in the Boston diocese, and the number they came up with was 20%. 20% of the priests were engaging, and that was a conservative number at the time, right? But that 20% were probably engaging in deviant sexual behavior. That's a big pill to swallow,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's 100 priests, 20 of them. 20. are engaged in some sort of sexual deviant behavior, oftentimes towards minors. And how do you reconcile that, right? Like, how do you reconcile that? How do you is that the personality of the person who wants to be a priest? Is that the policies of the diocese that enables that behavior? Or do predators just think that's the easy way to go after their prey? And is the celibacy the reason for that? I think the celibacy is the least of the problems, right? I think it's the personalities that aren't screened properly for that job. I think that whatever there is, there's psychological, a person who's predisposed to want to be a priest for whatever reason may also have tendencies to be deviant. That's just what I think, right? And
Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't resonate with me. It seems to me like they probably went into this profession with all the most honorable intentions. That they probably really did, believe that they've been called to do it, and that they were serving God this way. I think there's just going to be a physiological, psychological effect by denying yourself something that is so naturally that we're so naturally inclined to do. And I think that when you're constantly denying yourself something that is natural, that it's going to have some effects.
So I don't disagree with that, but there is a middle ground, right? Like, there is a middle ground. There's no secret that priests sometimes get a prostitute, or sometimes have a little something on the side, right? There's no secret about that. I mean, maybe there is.
Maybe with one of the record clerks.
You never know, right? I mean, the priest at my church, at my parish before this one now.
I was making a joke about the nuns who feel they need to take care of some business
right.
too.
Well, there could be some of that going on. There could be some of that going on too. I get that. No, but and look, we had a scandal at our church. The outgoing the priest who was there, Alex Kim, he was alleged to have been stooping the help. Not a nun, but a staffer that he brought in, and there's a big lawsuit going on for it, and he was removed from the church overnight for that. So there is a middle ground that priests have if they need a release like that, right?
It's authorized.
It's not authorized.
So they know they're going against what the church requires and expects of them. So no matter what, they're going to be feeling guilty.
Of course, but there's a difference. But what I guess my point is that there's a big leap between having a consenting adult female,
absolutely, yeah,
or even a prostitute, versus molesting kids.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where the disconnect is. It's did the celibacy drive them to straight to kids when they had all this other stuff that they could have had their outlet with prior to? And I don't think that's the case, right? I think that there is some psychological difference with somebody who wants to be a priest, maybe more so than any other job, that for whatever reason they have a propensity for deviant sexual behavior with kids, period. Right? I think that there's something about it. I don't know what it is, Greg. I'm talking. Yeah. I'm literally talking out of my ass right now. But I just don't see how you can go from, okay, I'm celibate, so wow, that 10-year-old really looks hot to me right now, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably a very, I would assume, and again, I'm just talking out my ass, but I would have to assume that, it's a slow process, and that there's just a something probably maybe not even noticeable, some type of
I don't think so.
With these kids are under your care, and you really care for them, And then there's a slow progression. I don't think there's just a one day where a priest says, you know what, I think I'm going to go and molest a kid. I think there has to be an evolution to it and a slow process, which they ultimately get. They engage in those feelings. Clearly something's gone wrong psychologically that they no longer can see how horrific it is, or they justify it by, who knows? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but there's got to be a progression to it. I don't think you just go into it. And
I think I don't disagree that there is a progression for all of that stuff, right? There's always going to be progression on deviant behavior. However, priests overall, the number one personality trait that I see with priests, they're introverts. Mm-hmm. Most of them are introverted. And I think that introvertedness, there's some other component to that, and I should get a psychologist in here to discuss that, right? Because there's some other component to that introvertedness that I think predisposes them to that deviant sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. That's what I think, so because again, you've got this other outlet over here that would be a way better, right? It's way better that Alex Kim was banging the consenting female help. You'd like to think she was consenting, versus a 10-year-old.
Right.
So, but I don't think, to get to your point though, I don't think that the celibacy is the problem. I'll tell you where celibacy is a problem. Celibacy is the problem in having a larger group of priests to pick from. Right, the vocation, they call it a vocation.
Or why not just let them get married and still serve the church?
So that they're,
let a priest be married.
Greek Orthodox allows their priests who are not on a leadership track, right? So you don't want to be a bishop or anything. They allow their priests, I think it's Greek Orthodox, to get married. And there's a lot to be said for that, right? There is a lot to be said for that. But as I get further and further into Catholicism as my religion, because I'm not a cradle Catholic, I just see that there's this huge benefit to having a priest who is really married to the church. Because what happens is, it's that they're not only just married to the church, they become married to the parishioners. It's an odd thing, right? There's this marriage between the priest and the parishioners at a church, and that we're working together much like a husband and wife work together. And it's not a top-down, like we're just going to tell you what to do, and you just have to sit there and be passive and just go with it. There really is this push-pull collaboration between parishioners and a priest. And I witnessed that solely because of the fact that Alex Kim and some of the things that he did to us at our parish prior to him getting booted out. I really saw that marriage and how when you have a priest who's dysfunctional, it's just like having a dysfunctional partner at home, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, you bring up an interesting point. Like if I were seeking some type of counseling, and I was a member of the Catholic Church, I would think that I would want to go and have a conversation with somebody that can identify with what I'm talking about. And, saying, hey, I understand these mm-hmm. issues that take place between a man and a wife, and I understand these feelings that you might have, or I understand how this adultery because they have personal life experience of their own that allows them to relate, as opposed to, well, the good book says this, and this is what you should do in God's eyes. I just think that you'll feel more... In taking his position as somebody giving advice, I would much rather be able to say, I understand what you're feeling. I've been there, done that. As opposed to say, I can't understand what you're saying, but I can tell you what to do now.
Well, I'll counter that. Two ways I'll counter that. First is there are a large quantity of priests now who were lay people prior to becoming priests. So they had relationships.
Lay people or get laid people?
Both.
Okay.
Lay and got laid, right? So they have a breadth of knowledge of what it was like to have relationships, right? Were some of them married? I don't know if they were married, but I know that there's quite a few now that were not up until their 40s or 50s, were just lay people. They had relationships. The second thing is this. How many times when you were a cop, before you had any relationship experience or real relationship experience, did you have to go to a house and counsel two people who sat there and were fighting, to a couple who'd been married for 40, 50 years and were having DV?
Yeah, and I was never probably very effective at it because they're looking at me like, you don't even understand this issue, dude. You're just a guy who's going to push your authority in here. And how about this? How about a 22-year-old cop in a uniform talking to these 45-year-old couple who was having a domestic violence or domestic episode, and the 22-year-old's going, here's what those guys aren't listening.
But
the only reason they're listening is because you carry the authority with them, but it doesn't mean that you are a very good counselor.
Well, agreed. However, you got better at it over time.
Well, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got better at it over time. But
same thing applies to priests, man. They get better at it over time.
If I were the 40-year-old cop going in and there was a 22-year-old couple arguing, and I sat down with them and said, listen, I understand what's going on here, guys, because I've lived this. I was 22. I had these issues.
Well, there's something to be said, though, for the fact that if you are a priest and you are getting, and you've counseled 500 couples over the past 20 years, even though you've never lived it, my God, if you've heard the problem 250 times out of the 500, well, okay, I know that problem, right? I mean, that's a problem that comes up. That's a problem that you're not alone in. Maybe I haven't experienced it, but I'm not here to be, the priest isn't there to say, okay, well, I've experienced this, therefore you should listen to me. The priest is there to say, listen, you're not alone in that problem, and here's what the Bible says about it.
Right.
Right.
Well, I get that. I understand that they can give sound biblical advice.
Sure.
But
this is good. I know for a fact that you and Bill, because Bill's also a Catholic, you guys go back and forth on this stuff quite a bit, don't you?
Well, we do.
This is Bill Hunt that I'm referring to.
Yeah, it's a mutual friend of ours, and I do. We'll have conversations, but again, I feel I respect and understand.
Yeah.
The Catholic faith. I don't adhere to or not adhere to it because I'm not a parishioner, but I don't embrace it just because I find that it can't be completely biblically supported. I find that the Bible itself is its best source of divine knowledge. It's its best source of divine information and perspective. I feel that. So
you don't like the interpretation then that the Catholic Church does? Is that what you?
Well, it's not necessarily. For instance, let's use the conversation we're having about celibacy. You can't defend that biblically, but yet the Church says this must be done. And so, if you can't defend this extremely difficult practice biblically, then why are we doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the type of things that
you bring up, and that's a great. I never even thought of that, right? And I don't have enough knowledge to know if that's the case. So you're saying there's no biblical reference to priests being celibate whatsoever.
The disciples were married.
Oh, that's true, huh? All right. Well, now I've learned something. Thank you, Greg. I've learned something new about my faith.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I believe in the Bible as divinely inspired, and that it gives great advice, and but when it starts to become organized religion, because mankind has a tendency of muddying up any and every water that it touches. So.
Yes, but again, I think that's what the Bible is there to do, right? It's to help right the ship every now and then.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, should we end it?
With a shot?
Oh, you want?
Oh, you'll drink with the priest, but not the cop.
Well, yeah, sure. Why not? We can end with a shot. You got to drink the rest of your coffee because all we have is this for.
Pour it in the cap.
God, you've never done this before, have you?
I have. What do they they say it's happy hour somewhere in the world.
It's happy hour somewhere in the world. You take the first shot.
The Bullet whiskey is good stuff. So thank you for bringing quality libations.
You're welcome. Shalom.
Now we're Jewish.
Now we're Jewish. I'm quarter Jew, actually. Do you know that?
No.
Yeah, I'm quarter Jew. My mom's dad was Jewish, so it runs through the mom's lineage. But she's not really full Jew either because her mom's not Jewish.
Okay, and then your wife is Japanese?
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese. Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say, what's the Vietnamese term for cheers?
No clue.
You don't know?
No,
oh, wow.
I don't know. Come on, which is thank you. I don't know.
Okay.
Wow, that was really good.
Isn't it good? Yeah. Great way to start the day.
Can I lick that?
Yeah. Then put it back on there.
Why not? Well, Greg, man, thank you. God, it was. Listen, I can't minimize in the slightest when I say that you're one of my favorite people in the whole world. Really, I mean that.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's touching. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
No hugs afterwards, but
Why not?
okay, maybe.
That'd be weird.
No, kissing would be weird.
Couple more shots.
Couple more shots, then we can kiss.
Yeah.
No, but you really are. You're one of my favorite people in the whole world, and
Thanks,
I love what I love about you is that you can talk to anybody about anything. You're always respectful about it, and even though you've had this huge dose of fame and notoriety, you are still like the same Greg. Like it has not changed you in the slightest, and that speaks a lot to your character as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, I appreciate that. If you knew me the way I knew me, then you'd know that there's a whole lot of psychosis going on and a lot of different issues that get suppressed, and that I think I've just got the whole world fooled.
Well, that's okay. We're all screwed up in some way, shape, or form. Nobody's perfect, right?
Yeah. But yeah, best of luck with this. This is fun. I think as you continue to bring on interesting guests, that this is going to be a great format for people to kind of tune in and get educated about a variety of subjects. So
yeah,
wish you the best. Is there a name for this?
The Cameron Jackson Show.
Perfect.
Yeah. In fact, we had a logo made, and we've got that all set and ready to go. But simple,
Yeah. Will you be like a DJ that has a nickname?
Like DJ Khalid or something like that?
Yeah, something cool.
No, because I'm not spinning any tunes, right? It's just me.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have a cool nickname that people get to know you by. I mean, Cameron's cool, but
the worst thing about Cameron Jackson as a name, Google results. You Google Cameron Jackson, gay porn star.
Is that right? Play off of that.
Well,
Yeah.
I could go one way or the other. I'm not quite sure which way.
Cam Bam.
Cam Bam.
That's perfect.
That could be. There you go. Right?
Bam.
Cam Bam. Yeah.
The one and only.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and Michael need a nickname too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like.
How do you pronounce your last name? I always butcher it.
No, he doesn't want to say his last name. It doesn't matter because it's
Okay.
saying in the credits. I call him Michael Zulu.
Okay.
Like Zulu, like the
Yeah.
African tribe, right?
Yeah.
Michael Zulu. I kind of like that.
There used to be a radio station or a broadcast called The Zoo. So it could be Michael the Zoo. I don't know.
When I grew up, I just told everyone just went Michael Zoo. Nothing fancy like Zoo, because that's not even right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're saying it to Siri, you have to say Michael. Actually, it always changes how you say it with Siri because sometimes she gets it right and sometimes she doesn't. But anyway, he's super nervous about being associated. He wants to keep his anonymity as much as possible. But I'm going to force it out of him.
There may be some foresight in that. You never know. This is gonna. You don't want to distance yourself from this potential mess.
Or distance himself from me.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. The Zoo and the Jew.
The Zoo and the Jew, dude.
Yes.
There you go.
Perfect.
All right, Greg.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Let's call it.
Let's call it.
All
Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Peace, Mike.
Peace out. Awesome, dude. Thank you for tuning in to the Cameron Jackson Show. Remember, you can listen to us on podcast or watch us on YouTube. We want to know what you think. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see more of. Leave your comments down below. We read them all. You can also contact us via email, CameronJacksonShow@gmail.com. And if you liked what you saw today, give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. This studio is funded by my company, C. Jackson Investigations. Need to find someone, run a background check, or catch a cheating spouse? C. Jackson Investigations can handle all of your investigative needs. To learn more, go to cjacksoninvestigations.com.